Great. Perfect. We are just gonna wait a few more minutes or seconds, I'd say, and we start with the presentation. Let me share this also. We will be recording the session and streaming in our social media and YouTube channels, so you'll be able to watch it later. Perfect. Awesome. We'll just wait a little bit longer. Perfect. Awesome. Okay. And I know some of you will join later on or will watch this the recording. So as I said, we'll be posting this in our social media platforms and YouTube. Welcome everyone. We are going to be talking today about immigration to Canada, specifically focusing on the economic class, skilled workers, and providing some updates into what's been happening pretty much for the past 2 years and what's coming from what we know in terms of immigration. So we are an immigration firm of regulated Canadian immigration consultants. We will be talking also about the services that we provide. But today's webinar session will be focused on how to come to Canada through the economic class. First, a quick round of introductions. Our principal consultant, Basil Sauter, he is also a regulated Canadian immigration consultant and active member in good standing with the SEC, and has obviously many years of experience in both immigration to Canada and the US. As I said, we are licensed to provide immigration services and advice all across Canada, including Quebec as well. We'll be learning throughout this presentation that Quebec uses indeed a different system, but we are also licensed and we can also help you with any immigration matters to Quebec. I myself am Maria Garces, also regulated Canadian immigration consultant, and I'll be walking you today through this presentation. All right, so without further ado, I'll introduce you a little bit on us, Encubate. We have 4 offices in Canada, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, and Montreal, Calgary being our newest office. But we obviously can provide you services and assist you inside and outside Canada. Our achievements are a little bit about us, our history. We've been in the industry for over 7 years now. And we have helped many clients from all over the world with any immigration matters, from temporary residence status, visitors visas, to citizenship applications. We can also assist you with that. So we do come with extensive experience in all these fields, and can help you in any immigration related matters. A little bit about our fantastic team. The reason why we like to show this slide is it's a show-up slide, really. Most of us came here initially temporarily to Canada and have worked our way through to become permanent residents and Canadian citizens. So the message we like to transmit with this slide is that there's a pathway for everyone. It's all about working towards the right steps, planning ahead, and making it happen. And obviously our newest member to the team, Rexy. Perfect. So a little bit more about our services. We do divide our services into 2 main categories: temporary residence services and permanent residence services. Temporary residence included anything from visitor visas, extensions, study permits, work permits, pretty much everything that has an end date on a temporary status in Canada, and also permanent residence services, so applying through any of the economic, family, classes, provincial, federal programs, Quebec, as we said, and ultimately Canadian citizenship. Now, how do we get to that point? The next slides will summarize what are the avenues, what are the main strategies that we've put together to become a permanent resident. Something I'd like to clarify from now is that there's a way for everyone. There's over 100 of possible combinations. There are many factors, as we will see during the presentation. So there's no solution that fits everyone. Every case is different in the eyes of immigration. But we're gonna be talking about the main strategies in the next slides. So, starting with let's say the main breakdown that we see, the general breakdown. One could immigrate to Canada through the temporary route, so coming initially as an international student or as a skilled worker. We'll talk a little bit more about this and how these open opportunities both at a federal and a provincial level. We could also immigrate through our skills, so as a skilled professional. We'll discuss this mainly reflected on an express entry. Business immigration is also another avenue to immigrate, so through investment, entrepreneurship, and investing in a business or a startup in Canada. And then we jump into the family classes, so spousal sponsorship and family immigration, whether we are eligible to sponsor our parents, grandparents, and children. And last but not least, the refugee and asylum class. So we're not going to be discussing in detail all of this today. We just wanted to give you a breakdown, a brief overview of the main pathways that we find. As you'll see, we'll be focusing in the first two, which is immigrating as a skilled professional and including as well the student and worker right. So starting with the most common question, specifically interesting for those who are outside Canada, for those who have not necessarily been in Canada before. Canada does have programs that could fit you. So we'll discuss on immigrating as a skilled professional. Now, we divide this into more subcategories. So depending on the skills, languages, and factors that you can demonstrate, we can identify a few different routes, starting with languages. If you do have an advanced level in one of the languages, we'll talk in a second about what advanced means. And in combination with other factors, you may have enough points to be invited and apply for permanent residence. Having also both languages, so both official languages in Canada, English and French, one of them being at an upper intermediate level at least, could give us enough points to migrate to a provincial or an express entry level. Also through studies. So if we do come to study in Canada in a public institutions, there are certain institutions that do count for this. We also have opportunities both at a federal and provincial level. Next, working in Canada. So accumulating enough Canadian work experience that will give us enough points or make us qualify for a provincial program. Which is also linked with the next point, the job offer. So being sponsored by a company or having a job offer exempted from an Lmia. We'll discuss more details later on during the presentation. And last, if our occupation is currently in demand in any of the provinces, we may also get selected and have an opportunity to apply through that route. Now, there are three main systems of selection, including immigration programs that we need to consider here, and that we'll walk through during this presentation, starting with federal. So federal, we are referring to IRCC when we get invited to apply or apply for a program without the need of a provincial nomination or Quebec selection system. The main system for this is express entry. We will be discussing express entry in depth now that it's back, and we'll be providing you with updates on what's new and what's been happening for the past 2 years. It's a point-based system, and it's for those who have intentions to reside outside of Quebec. So anywhere but in Quebec, if we intend to reside in any province but Quebec, we can consider this program. We also have provincial selection. We'll see that a couple of provincial programs that we've included. Every province has their own, every province and territory have their own provincial programs. The idea is that we get nominated from that province if we meet the specific requirements for that program. And we get additional points or the chance to apply directly for permanent residence upon nomination. So the province supports our application for permanent residence pretty much. And lastly, we have Quebec. They do have their own selection system and a couple of programs that we'll review as well. But the main system is called Lmia, similar to Express Entry, also based on points, but does require us to speak certain level of French and other requirements that we'll see at the end of this presentation. Now, in terms of timelines, the application process could look like something like this. I do have to mention that because of COVID, some of these have been more than expected, but as things resume, as draws resume and programs nominate candidates, we'll hopefully start to see these numbers going back to what we used to see. So the preparation phase, anything between 3 to 9 months, depending on our level of languages, depending on how prepared we are in terms of documents and factors that we can claim points for. The Express Entry phase, and again, this is considering that we are taking Express Entry as a route. So creating the profile once we have all the documents ready, and receiving that invitation could take anything between 1 to 3 months. Once we submit, should we receive a nomination through a provincial program. So once we go with the province and submit an application with the province, could take anything from, I would say 2 to 5 months, based on latest times, depending highly on the province and the program. And if approved, we'll receive a confirmation or a certificate of nomination. Now, counting with the support of a provincial program will increase our score in the Express Entry system and definitely increase the chances of getting selected in the next draw. Once that happens and once we receive an invitation from the federal program, so the federal government, IRCC, would then be talking about preparing the application, so gathering the rest of documents and formalizing that application for permanent residence, anything between a couple months. And last but not least, the PR processing time. So once we've submitted the application, it's waiting time. Ideally, IRCC processes this between 6 to 9 months, and they have announced that they aim to go back to these processing times, but because of the big backlog during the pandemic, we'd have to consider a few extra months until they clean this backlog. So this is a very generic overview, and it highly depends on the case, the province, if there's a nomination or not, but this could give you an idea of planning ahead. Now let's talk more about Express Entry, how it works, what are the factors to consider, and what are the steps to follow if we proceed through this route. As I said, it is the system that IRCC uses to select candidates to immigrate to Canada. I used to say it's relatively new, not anymore, honestly. It was implemented at the beginning of 2015. Prior to that, it was a first-come, first-based application system. We only had to meet certain minimum requirements, but the processing times were quite high, anything from 3 to 4 years. So the government decided to change this, and in 2015 introduced a new system, Express Entry, which is based in what we call a best in, first out system that selects candidates that rank the highest within the system. We'll discuss in the next slide where the points come from and how to maximize that score. But obviously the big advantage that came with this was lower processing times. IRCC has aimed to process applications through this system in 6 months or under. As I just mentioned, we expect these times to come back shortly, but for now, we're seeing further delays as a result of COVID backlog. Now, in terms of factors, what does Express Entry give us points for? There are 4 selection factors that will build the score that we get in our Express Entry profile. Starting with languages, this is definitely the most important factor and the one that can influence the most our score. As I said, both languages, English and French, are official in Canada, so whichever one you decide to use, it's completely fine. And as we will see, if you can prove both, we'll get extra bonus points for that. But there are tests that we need to take to approve the level of this proficiency. In the case of English, we have Ielts general training and self-pit general test. And for French, we can take either the TEF Canada or the TCF Canada. They need to be valid, and that means that they need to have taken in the past 2 years. So they have a 2-year validity here. Education is also a very important factor that we can claim quite some points for. It goes by level. So for any education that we completed outside Canada, we need to do what we call an ECA, an Educational Credential Assessment, which is an equalization of your foreign studies into pretty much Canadian credentials. So this report is what will allow us to claim points in our Express Entry profile. Obviously, for any experience for any education, that you completed inside Canada, you get awarded points for that, and there won't be a need for this ECA. Third factor, work experience. We can claim points for this as well, up to 3 years. It's what we get maxed on. And this can be experienced both inside and outside Canada. We need to make sure, however, that it meets the requirements of being qualified. For that, we need to look at certain factors, such as being full-time and being a qualified position. We'll discuss this in a few slides. But remember that the classification of the position of the NOC needs to be 0, A, or B. And last, definitely not least, unfortunately, H. We put it last because there's really nothing we can do about it. It is what it is, but it's important to know that it affects the score, it impacts the total score of our Express Entry profile. Once we reach 30, we start losing 5 points for every year that we turn. So again, a lot of clients ask us, oh, if I'm over 30, I cannot immigrate anymore. It's not the case. What we have to work on is compensating this loss for points with other factors, such as adaptability, such as languages. Now, the scenario that we have included here to our right, where it says your profile, it's the typical profile that we tend to find in clients, someone with an intermediate level of their language, someone who has a bachelor's, whether that's made outside Canada, 3 years of experience, and it's under the age of 30. It's a very common profile we tend to see, but unfortunately is within a score range that it's not within the selection that IRCC has been issued their invitations under. So 290 to 350 points, it's more or less what this combination will give us. What we want to emphasize is that anything under 470 points will have a very low chance of getting an invitation to apply under Express Entry. So we have to work on improving those factors, as I said, whether it's through languages or adaptability. We'll show you more of the breakdown of these points in the next slides. And we'll also provide more clarity on what's been happening with the points and where do we stand as of today. Now, the selection factors that, as I was just mentioning, can be improved. Express Entry is a dynamic system that we can update as we go. When it comes to languages, highly recommend working on achieving an advanced level, whether that's English or French. Advanced being a CLB9 in the Canadian language benchmark level or tables. Education, to maximize the score here, master's or above, in combination with other factors, will give us the transferability points for education. Work experience, having 3 years or above full-time in that qualified position, will also max our score when it comes to work experience. And lastly, being under the age of 30 will obviously also maximize our points for age, because we would not be losing any points. So this combination here could give us 470 points and above. We know that it's a challenge because we tend to see that any of these factors cannot be achieved, whether that's age, years of experience, the level of education, or even the level of languages. But we're going to be discussing potential alternatives to that challenge. Something to notice here is that the level of education that we can claim points for in our express entry profile, being a bachelor's degree, for example, gained outside Canada with a one-year diploma, whether that's public or private, that level will increase to 2 or more degrees or 2 or more diplomas, and will give us the same transferability points as a master's degree. So if you're thinking about immigrating through education, which is one of the topics we'll discuss in brief, it could be a good combination when it comes to points. Now, here's where I break down the news of what's been happening based on our experience, and obviously based on what IRCC has been announcing. Express entry draws resumed as of beginning of July. We were impatiently waiting for this because they had been on hold for over a year and a half, since December 2020, specifically for the Federal Skilled Worker Program. I'll show the couple tables in a second. However, we've seen a very high cutoff score, but this was expected due to the high accumulation of candidates during this year and a half. So as of today, we'll see that the score is much higher than it was when Express Entry paused. IRCC has also announced that they'll drop processing times from what we've seen anything between 18 to 24 months during the pandemic to 6 months. As I said, it is still not clear when this will take place and if they will actually drop it to the 6 months, but they've promised us that. There's also news on the NOC system coming and being implemented in November this year. To give you all a brief introduction to the NOC system, it is the National Occupational Classification system and classifies jobs based on skill levels and codes. And these skill levels are assigned based on the expected education level or experience that each of these jobs need. So we'll see that there are 5 levels, 0A, B, C, or D, but we can only consider 0A and B for immigration purposes as qualified. So there will be a new NOC system being implemented. This gets renewed every 10 years, and they revise it every 5 years. So it's time for it to be renewed. And we expect a further breakdown of the NOCs. Right now, they break it into generic groups. We expect further breakdown, and we'll talk about the importance of selecting the right NOC. And last but not least, there have been speculations or announcements of NOC-specific draws starting in 2023. This has also been announced by IRCC. It is still unclear if it would be a different program or if it would be only certain draws or all of them. But something that has been announced for sure is that Canada's immigration system will be working towards supporting the labor force and the labor market in Canada. So we expect changes accordingly to the system based on these goals. All right. Now, when it comes to the invitations, I'm breaking down here the table for the draws that took place for any program during Express Entry. So during the pandemic, we saw that there were program-specific draws, but this table here involves programs that were not specific to a program. So every candidate in Express Entry that was eligible and met that score was invited. Now, we see the big break here, as I mentioned, end of 2020, the last draw with 5,000 invitations, underscore being 468 points. And obviously during this year and a half, large accumulation of highly qualified candidates happened. And it came back with just 1,500 invitations and a score of 557, almost over 100 points since the last time the draw happened. We saw another draw the 2 weeks after. So good news is that they're starting to do this bi-weekly like they used to. Increased the invitation numbers by a little and dropped the minimum score by 542. And there was another draw last week. It's not reflected on the table yet, but that invited 2,000 candidates and the cutoff score was 533. So we expect the invitations to keep slowly increasing and for the minimum score to slowly drop, but we are very uncertain yet on how far the score will drop and how many invitations will the government keep issuing. But these are the news so far. On the same note, what I was just mentioning, that IRCC held program-specific draws during the pandemic. They wanted to support also the labor market and focused on those who were inside Canada or had experience in Canada for at least 1 year through the Canadian Experience Class program. We have not seen this separation of programs since September. As I said, the draws that are taking place right now in Express Entry are for any candidates that are eligible and are within the selection range. Perfect. Now let's talk about a little bit more on how we can increase those points, specifically the transferability part of it. So how can we combine the factors that we claim points for under Express Entry to maximize our overall CRS score? Starting with work experience in combination with languages. This is also very important for you to understand the magic or the importance of languages. So considering those 3 years of qualified work experience with an upper intermediate level of any of the languages, CLB 7, will be getting 25 points for transferability, versus combining the 3 years of work experience with an advanced level in all brackets of the language proficiency test will double those points that we get for transferability for 50 points. So that's why I was recommending at the beginning, work in your language if you have the chance, because this is a factor that we can utilize the most to maximize that score. Just for you to know, in the Ielts general training test, a CLB 9, so this advanced level, translates into a 7 across all disciplines except for an 8 in listening. Now, when we combine language with education, we're looking into also a similar breakdown of points. So having a bachelor's degree with an upper intermediate level of English or French, we get 13 points. Having a bachelor's degree with an advanced level of English and French, we get 25 points. And having 2 or more degrees or a master's, this is the combination that I was previously mentioning, plus that advanced level of any of the languages, we get 50 points, again, maximizing our score in those transferability factors. Now, more specifically into the work experience factor and what we can claim points for under Express Entry. In order for us to consider that experience as qualified and being able to claim those points, it needs to have been continuous if it's outside Canada for at least 1 year at a full-time basis, which translates into 30 hours per week as a minimum to be considered full-time, and needs to have been paid. No volunteer experience will count under Express Entry. As mentioned as well, the job position, the work experience that we have needs to be in a qualified occupation classified in the NOC system as 0A or B. And if we want to consider part-time experience, that's totally fine, as long as in combination all those years sum up to at least 1 year of full-time, again, following the same conditions of being in a qualified position and paid. It's a bit different when it comes to Canadian experience, because for Canadian experience, we can count cumulative, but in all cases, we always need to focus on it being full-time and in a qualified position. Another factor determining both your eligibility and your financial admissibility later on at a permanent residence application stage is your ability to be financially sufficient when you come to Canada. We call this proof of funds, and it will vary the amount that we need to demonstrate depending on your family size. We've provided the most up-to-date table here, and this can be proved in many ways, through bank statements mainly, and needs to have been there for at least 6 months. Very, very important that those funds need to be maintained there throughout the application and at the time of landing when approved. Now, those are the requirements, or those are the factors that we look into in express entry. As you saw, one could come and land literally as a permanent resident if being invited and apply to express entry without the need of having to come to Canada. But there's instances that whether that's for language or any other factor that we cannot get to that selection score, we would be seeking to come first temporarily to Canada as a worker, and that's what we'll be looking in the next slide. Now, coming temporarily, specifically as a worker, will depend on your situation, meaning that depending on your circumstances, you will be eligible to apply for one type of work permit or another. Now, the goal here is to obtain qualified Canadian work experience. Just because we have a permit does not mean that we can apply or will get selected or our chances will improve. We actually need to utilize that work permit, or we recommend to utilize that work permit to gain qualified work experience to later on make you eligible on the Canadian Experience Class program in Express Entry or a provincial program. Now, what are the types of work permit that we could apply for? Probably the most famous one, the post-graduation work permit, which we're eligible for once we graduate from a public post-secondary institution in Canada or an institution that is authorized to award degrees or programs that follow PGWP rules. The program needs to have been for at least 8 months and needs to be in the DLI list and studied at a full-time basis. It's a type of open work permit, meaning that there are no restrictions when it comes to the employer, location, or how many hours we can work per week. So it's the ideal work permit. We also have an open work permit coming as an accompanying spouse of an international student or a worker. You can also utilize this work permit to gain qualified work experience. And then we jump into closed work permits that come as a result of LMIA applications or Lmi exemption codes. We'll talk about LMIAs in the next slide, but in summary, if we get the confirmation from ESDC, or if we fall under one of the Lmi exemption codes, based on having a job offer in Canada, we could apply for a work permit. This time it would be closed, meaning that's restricted to the employer mentioned in the work permit. Just to add a little bit more on the codes here, there is a broad list of LMI exemption codes depending on your circumstances, depending on the free trade agreements that your country has with Canada. Highly recommend to look into it if you are considering coming as a worker and obtaining that qualified experience. We'll talk about a couple interesting ones in a second. And last but not least, the International Experience Canada program, which is based on the agreements that Canada has with your respective countries. We have 3 main categories here: the working holiday, the young professionals, and the COP. And also we come with the support of recognized organizations that could help in any of these cases. Now, what is an LMIA, or a labor market impact assessment? We also call it employer sponsorship because it consists on the process of obtaining a positive letter from the Labor Department, the ESDC, Employment and Social Development Canada Department, confirming that there won't be a negative impact on the labor market on hiring a foreign national. The way an employer can solicit this or apply for this is by demonstrating that they have tried recruiting someone in the Canadian market. So they have tried recruiting permanent residents and Canadian citizens, and they have not been successful at it because there's not enough labor supply, or they have just not found someone with the right skills. In order to do this, you need to follow a process, advertise the position that you are hiring for at least 4 weeks in 3 different platforms, a bunch of forms to follow, and pretty much prepare a report where you are demonstrating to the government that you've tried to hire someone. If indeed any of the PR or Canadian citizens applicants are eligible for the job, the employer must actually interview this person and provide compelling reasons as to why they did not hire the Canadian citizen or the permanent resident. So there's definitely a process to follow, and it's up to ESDC to determine if there will be a positive or negative impact. If positive, we move to the next phase on the application, which is applying for the foreign workers work permit. Okay, let me just see if we have forgotten something. No. So LMIA can take anything between 2 weeks to 3 months, depending on how we apply and the stream that we apply under. Something very important as well that we'll see in this next slide is that having a positive LMIA, so having a positive labor market impact assessment, will give us the opportunity to claim 50 to 200 points in our express entry. Now, the slide that we see here breaks down in further the points that what we call adaptability or extra points that we could get in express entry, mainly focusing on those activities from studies to work that we can perform in Canada. So post-graduation work permits, first of all, as I mentioned, our work permit that would allow us to accumulate or obtain that qualified Canadian work experience. They can be issued from anywhere from 1 to 3 years, depending on the duration of the studies and up to the discretion of the officer. And then we have open work permits for accompanying spouse, which can be issued from anything from 3 to 5 years, depending on the length of the program of the student or skilled worker and the length of the job offer and that work. Now, when it comes to points, qualified work experience in Canada, again, in a position that's classified as 0, A, or B, and that meets the requirements of being full-time and at least those 12 months, can give us anything from 40 to 60 points. So that's why we highly recommend to utilize that work permit to accumulate that Canadian work experience. We also have points, or we can also be awarded points for education in Canada in a public institution, as I mentioned, anything from 15 to 30 points, depending on the type of program that we study. A job offer, like we just said, will give us anything between 50 to 200 points, depending on the NOC level, as long as it's in a qualified occupation. And last but not least, having a provincial nomination. So having applied with a province and getting the certificate of nomination will award us with 600 points in express entry. Perfect. My favorite part. So how can we utilize our French skills or the French language to immigrate to Canada? The government, IRCC, has actually been trying to increase Francophone immigration for the past few years. And they have taken several steps to facilitate the immigration of Francophone speakers. One of them being the increase of bonus points that we get in our express entry profile. It was announced end of 2020, almost 2 years now, whereas before we only used to get 25 points for having an upper intermediate level of French. We now get 50 bonus points, which, to give you an idea, is the same as having a job offer supported by an LMIA in a position 0, A, or B. It also helps us in other ways that we'll discuss in a second, but it's important to understand what upper intermediate French means. As mentioned, there are 2 exams that we can take to demonstrate this level, TEF Canada or TCF Canada, and they need to be at a B2 level. It translates into very weird numbers because their system, it's a bit different, but if you look those exams up, you'll be able to see what that CLB 7 equals to. And these bonus points can be claimed only if we have French at that upper intermediate level in combination with a CLB 5 in English, which is basic to intermediate level. But French can also help us obtaining work authorization under one of the Lmi exemption codes that I was mentioning a couple slides ago, specifically through the code C16. Falls under Francophone mobility. And again, we are looking into a B2, a CLB 7 in French across all brackets. And it's for those who have a job offer outside of Quebec in a qualified position, 0A or B, and can demonstrate this upper intermediate level of French, the CLB7. What Lmi Exempt means is that the employer will not need to go through the Lmi process. There's no need for the employer to demonstrate that they have done the recruitment process and follow the Lmi steps. Instead, because you as an applicant meet the requirements of an exemption, could go ahead and apply for a work permit. Very interesting. Now, following French, and just because I mentioned how can we utilize those French skills to immigrate to Canada, there are provincial programs that have also been developed as a result of this objective of increasing Francophone immigration outside of Quebec. As you could imagine, most of the Francophone immigration goes to Quebec or provinces with both languages as official language. But we're going to explore here a couple of programs, specifically one in Ontario, my favorite program actually, that has been working really well in selecting Francophone speakers. Now, the highlights about this program are that it does not require you to have experience in Canada. It does not require you to have education in Canada, and it does not require you to have a job offer, which is unlikely for most provincial programs. Instead, it focuses on you having certain level of languages and a specific score range, and having at least, here we go, a bachelor's degree. So as an education level, having at least 1 year of experience and having an upper intermediate level of French and an intermediate level of English. I do have to say that once again, we recommend to focus on maximizing the score in one of those languages. But the CLB7, it's mandatory. So that B2 that we've just mentioned would be mandatory. Now, when it comes to provincial programs, and this one specifically, because it is not based on having a job offer, it's not based on having education or experience there, we need to focus on demonstrating ties to that province, to the officer. So we need to prove to the government, to the provincial government, that we intend to move to that province, and that will contribute to obviously the development of the economy later on. The good thing is that it's a program that works with express entries, so the provinces have access, if you allow it, obviously, they have access to express entry pool candidates, and those who meet the requirements could be invited directly by the province. It's a two-step process because it involves going and applying with the province first versus applying with the federal government directly. But it also gives us an opportunity when we are maxed out on all the factors and we cannot improve in our express entry profile points anymore. Now, there are obviously, as of today, over 60 or over 70 provincial programs at the moment. There is a program for everyone almost. So we won't have time to discuss all today, but I'll provide you an overview of what are the main categories of provincial programs that we tend to see. So provinces, the logic behind provincial programs is to attract talent or retain talent to contribute to that province's labor market. And they do this through different types of programs. Every province usually has about 4 to 7 streams. For example, selecting candidates based on their position. If we were to have an express entry profile or an expression of interest with that province, and we declare experience in a position that's currently in demand in that province, we may get selected under the in-demand occupation or priority occupation streams. These positions tend to be in qualified positions. There's a couple where semi-skilled or low-skilled positions are considered, but generally speaking, in a qualified position. And the way the programs work, it targets specific positions based on the labor needs. This is outside of Quebec. Quebec has its own system, as we'll see. But it is the other option next to having languages that does not require us to have experience or education in the province. Next one would be through having a job offer. Generally speaking, the job offer needs to be in a qualified position as well, and we need to be able to demonstrate at least 1 to 2 years of experience directly related to that position. Again, highly depend on the province. Each province drafts these programs based on their needs. The job offer is Lmi exempted in this case. We don't have to perform an Lmia, but we'd still need the commitment of the employer hiring you, hiring the foreign national, and again, outside of Quebec. We could also look into provincial programs by having experience in that province, qualified experience generally speaking, and at least 1 year. And last but not least, the student route, international graduate stream, international student stream. Most provinces have a substream for international students. Requirements are for the institution that we graduated from to be public. So to be allowed to issue those post-graduation work permits, and once again, outside of Quebec in a post-secondary institution. Some example of these are the Saskatchewan, the SINP program, which has been very active for the past few years. Just also want to mention that we are regulated in that province as well, and we count with the licensee to represent you under this program. And Saskatchewan surprisingly has many provincial streams. A lot of them targeted to support the province's economic needs. For example, they have a healthcare stream, and they also award points for those who speak both languages. There are provinces that would only look at one language, but Saskatchewan is one of them that award you extra points if you can demonstrate certain level in the second official language, in French. We have to demonstrate those ties to Saskatchewan, or at least our efforts and intentions to reside there. And they also work, part of the programs work through the Express Entry Immigration System. This one specifically, which is their in-demand occupations. So this is the example of the first option I was showing in the previous slide, as having experience in an occupation that's currently in demand and that will support the economic development of that province. Interestingly enough, Saskatchewan changes the list quite often. So the occupations in demand will never stay the same. It's almost hard to predict sometimes what they'll come up with, but there is a list of positions that have been selected, and one could look into what is that likelihood of getting an invitation. Usually the draws have been every 2 to 3 weeks, but as I said, they issue this invitation based on labor needs, and it may change. Very important too is that we need to have also an expression of interest with the province on top of our Express Entry profile, or if not just with the province. And another program or another province that has a very interesting provincial program as well is New Brunswick. We need to show those ties to the province. Once again, it's important to understand that when seeking the support of a provincial nomination, when applying with the province, we need to demonstrate to the province that we intend to reside there, that we intend to work there, that we intend to bring our kids there, and we need to show these efforts if we, let's say, don't have family there or have never been to one of these provinces before. We need to demonstrate and show the officer that we have tried, we have researched this province, and that we are planning to land and come here once we get approved. The New Brunswick Provincial Nomination Program for skilled workers. They actually have quite some programs. I put them together here nicely, but they have an interesting one for French speakings as well, which is the strategic initiative stream. It only requires candidates to have a CLB5, which is a bit below what the CLB7 we were just discussing about. But highly encourage you to push for that CLB7, as they invite candidates also based on the Express Entry score and on the ties and what we call intentions that you have shown to reside in that province. And then the rest of streams don't have to necessarily do with French, but will require us to either have a job offer or experiencing one of the NOCs that are in demand in that province. That is just a very brief summary of provincial programs. As I said, there are over 60 programs open as of today and working. It will all depend into your circumstances, looking at your factors and seeing whether your occupation is on demand, whether you speak enough, or whether you have a strong language level to fall under one of the Francophone programs, or whether you have a job offer or studies in one of these programs. So very important to look at all these factors to see which of these would apply to your case. Now, the last set of selection is with Quebec, following the structure I showed at the beginning of the presentation. Quebec selects its candidates mainly through their system called ARIMA. It's similar to Express Entry from the point of view that it's a point-based system, it's online as well, and it selects the highly skilled candidates, so those with the highest score there. However, the allocation of points is different from that of Express Entry. They prioritize here the knowledge of French and having it at least at an intermediate level. Based on our experience, advanced is where we can maximize that score. And we'll see in a second how they have selected candidates for the past few months. Now, it works in a way that we first need to get selected through the system, apply with the province, and once they have given us the green light, meaning yes, we have the confirmation of Quebec wanting to select us, we then go to the federal government and apply for our permanent residence application. They will be the ones checking admissibilities, securities, and so on. Now, it's important to know that ARIMA has been selecting candidates based on two main factors. One being the NOC, so they have been targeted candidates based on the needs that the province has, and that's where you will see here NOC specific, also looking at the score, but they have also invited candidates based on having a job offer. So unlike Express Entry, they have not issued invitations only to those within a range. Instead, what they have done is to select those that meet requirements of either having a job offer outside of Montreal metropolitan area or having experience in a position that's currently in demand. And for that, they have a list of positions, which I have attached here. These vary and these change, not every draw, but quite often. For example, the last one we saw that nurses and some health-related positions were selected as well. But right now, they're highly targeting those in the IT field and professions. So highly recommend to look into it if you speak French and have experience in any of these occupations. On top of ARIMA and their skilled worker program, they also have the Peq Program, sort of an equivalent to the Canadian Experience Class. So demonstrating either experience or studies in the province. We have the temporary worker one, which requires us to have 2 years of experience in a qualified occupation, 0A or B. This experience needs to have been gained while on a work permit. So whether that's a post-graduation work permit, open work permit as an accompanying spouse, or any of the Lmi exemption codes. It requires us to demonstrate a B2, so an upper intermediate level in French, so that's CLB7. And the same logic of being approved by the province and later on applying with the federal government. This one takes a bit longer to process. And still within the Peq program, we have the student graduate, 2, depending on the level of our studies. They will both require us to have that B2 in French, so that's CLB7. In the case of the one in the left, we require at least a 2-year diploma in a valid institution in Quebec and a year and a half, 18 months of experience in a qualified occupation, 0A or B. And in the case of us studying either a master's or a PhD, the year or the months of experience get reduced to 12, not levels still being qualified occupation. Before I jump into the next slide, this concludes the brief and really brief overview of potential programs, immigration programs to Canada, different selection processes, factors to consider, how to maximize our points. Once we become permanent residents, we can think about becoming citizens if we meet with those requirements. So important to know that once we become a permanent resident, we'll either have to extend our status or apply or extend our permanent residence or apply for Canadian citizenship if we don't want to lose it. And in order to become a Canadian citizen, we need to meet with a certain list of requirements, starting with having physical presence in Canada. So we need to have resided at least 3 years accumulated. And that's why it's specified in days, 1,095 days. Temporary residence counts as half a day. So those years that we, or up to a year that we expend as either international students or worker, count as half day, meaning that if we were in Canada 2 years as a worker and then became permanent residents, those 2 years as a worker can be counted as a 1 full year as a temporary residence, and then add the 2 years as a permanent resident. This period needs to have been prior to the 5 years of application. So we always have to backtrack 5 years before when we are deciding to apply and make sure that we're meeting with the total of those days. We need to demonstrate that we can speak one of the official languages. You may be exempted depending on the factors, but it's still a requirement, and we will need to take a test and be inside Canada at the time of applying. So again, this is at the very end of everything that I spoke about. A lot of our clients obviously come initially immigrate as either permanent residents or come to a temporary route with the purpose of later on obtaining Canadian citizenship. But there's obviously a process to follow, steps to plan, and for that we highly recommend to get an evaluation and an assessment of your actual possibilities, your steps to follow, and what we advise for your case. We offer customized immigration assessments and consultations where we actually sit down, we look at your factors, your experience, your education, if your NOC is in demand or not. And then we prepare a report explaining all your options, scenarios, and potential steps that you have to take in each of these scenarios, together with the requirements. Very important to plan ahead and understand from the very beginning what are your actual options. Sometimes, actually, most of the times, it's not enough with just opening a profile. We'll have to take some action, either whether that's through taking language exams, learning a new language, coming temporarily in Canada. But we focus on these consultations in finding that perfect combination that will get us to the ideal score, whether that's at a federal or at a provincial level. And our consultations are for 1.5 hours, so we have enough time to discuss the report, your scenarios, and the next steps. You can do so by going to our website, and on the top right corner there, you have scheduled consultation. We have a team of professionals that have experience, many years of experience in this. And we offer our services in multiple languages. Let me see if I can remember them all: English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, and Ukrainian. I really hope I'm not forgetting any language, but we can assist you in any of these languages, both through our consultations and our general services, so study permits, permanent residence, and so on. And you can obviously contact us at or going to our website or at connect@incubate.ca, which is here. I will leave a few minutes for questions, and please type them in the chat. And if there are no questions, we'll end this session soon, but I'll leave this here so you can have our contact details handy, our WhatsApp, website, and our email, most importantly, connect@encubate.ca. Thank you very much for being here today. And please, if you have any questions, type them in the chat, and I'll be happy to respond. All right, so I think there are no questions for today, which is great. But anyways, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining. As I said, we have recorded this session. It will be available in our social media channels as well as our YouTube channel. And we hope to help you in the near future and assist you in any immigration related matters to Canada. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.